Welcome to the thisABILITY Adventures podcast. I'm Andrea Anderson.
And I'm Chip Dodd from Team thisABILITY. Hello, everybody. This is Chip Dodd from Team thisABILITY, and this is the race ramble from the recent Adventure Race Croatia that we just completed in May. And boy, was this a race. We've got a lot to talk about and hopefully educate you guys on what it's like to do an international race. But first, I got to start off. We have a special guest here, Clay Ballantine. And I'll start off. We raced, I guess, side by side. Our teams kind of leapfrogged a few times, and in some past races. That's the longest day. And what was the other one? I guess it was Endless Mountains. I think we leapfrogged, right? Mm-hmm. And we even shared some B-52's lyrics and some other stuff, trying to stay awake on paddle sections. And so we kind of knew we were generally about the same speed, and we kind of were happy-go-lucky, having fun while we're racing. And so I guess Kate, I guess, gets or the team, the Electric Mayhem won the raffle for a free Croatia entry at the last Endless Mountains. And what, Kate, you and your husband couldn't go, right?
Right.
You couldn't go. So I think Andrea and I are sitting in bed, and I'm like looking through my email, and I get an email from you saying, hey, we can't do this race. Clay wants to still do it, but he doesn't have a team. Any chance you guys are interested? I look next to Andrea, and I was like, you want to do Croatia this year? And she was like, hell yeah. And then immediately I'm texting Caitlin, because she's our go-to at our Team thisABILITY. It's like Caitlin has first right of refusal for any race. And I'm like, texted her, and I think probably within a couple hours, she's like, hell yeah. So I think I got back to you within less than 24 hours, and we're like, Clay's got a team. So I guess let me kick it over to you. That was kind of my recollection of. I know we did eventually talk to Clay and say, hey, by the way, if you've got anybody, we're open. But right now, three of us are ready to roll and do this race and do the best we can. So.
Yeah, I think that speaks really well to the spirit of Team thisABILITY, doesn't it? That I thought those guys, they seem like they would be pretty game. I didn't imagine such a fast response. So cheers to you. Yeah. But yeah, the Electric Mayhem won this raffle after Endless Mountains last year for free entry into AR Croatia. And Clay, my brother there, wanted to do it, but my husband and I, Jason, the other two people on the team, we are on sabbatical right now, so we wouldn't be available. So we thought, well, who might be a good team for Clay? And you guys came up right away. So I think I'm so excited to hear more about this race from all of you. And I really appreciate you inviting me to host. What an honor. And I first just want to say congratulations again. Really, congratulations again to you guys. And we're going to dig in. So I thought what we could do is start with just some overview, big picture questions, just to get a sense for things, and then hone in on some of the details, and then maybe wrap it up by zooming out again at the end. So just to get us started, why don't each of you just share with us your name and where you're living, and then we can go from there. Clay, do you want to start?
Sure. So Clay Ballantine, older brother, and I'm in Amherst, Massachusetts.
And you guys can just kind of be easy about it. Take it away.
Caitlin, you want to go?
Yeah, so Caitlin Thorn, I've been racing with Team thisABILITY for a few years now. Been racing expeditions since 2018, and I'm living in Huntsville, Alabama.
And I'm Andrea Anderson, and I live in Virginia Beach. I've been racing mostly with Chip since about 2016.
Yep, same here. I live in Virginia Beach, and I try to get out of Virginia Beach as much as possible because there's no mountains. But yeah, so Andrea and I are kind of co-captains of Team thisABILITY and been racing as much as possible.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to coming back about that, because that is one of, I think, the known identities of Team thisABILITY, is that you guys are out there everywhere all the time. But first, can we just get sort of an overview of AR Croatia? If you could share just sort of a big picture description of what is this expedition race. And Chip, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I can go off that. Of course, it's in Europe, and it's one of the most sought after races I think that teams want to do. I'm pretty sure it sells out almost every year, and the race director likes to keep it kind of intimate. He doesn't want it to get to 300 teams. He wants to keep it tight so that he can keep control of it and really make sure the teams have a really good experience. Like most races, they want to put their heart and soul into it. They want to show you the highest of the highs and the vistas and the beautiful rivers and the culture. And so I think he purposely keeps it very tight. So it does sell out every year. So when you guys had the ticket, it was like, yes, that means we're not like sitting on the computer at 6 a.m. in the morning to jump on there and get our entry. We had the entry already. So, but the other thing it's known for is a lot of transitions. There's a lot of legs. The race director does not want to put you on these big monster legs that you're on a bike for 48 hours. It's only a 4-day race, but I think in this race there was like 14 or 16. Well, again, the race changed as we're going to talk about, but because of the weather. But I think when we started off, we knew there was going to be somewhere between 14 and 16 transitions. And so it becomes a part of the race. It's like a sport to get through transition. But I think overall, Croatia is known for just beauty. It's kind of Mediterranean feeling. Usually it's a warm race. It's a sunny race. And there's lots of just the beauty of the country is unbelievable. It's safe relative to some other countries that you can race in. Good medical care, good cell coverage, and that type of thing. So it is, I believe it's one of the most sought after races, especially in Europe for sure. It's probably the most well-known race, but I think maybe even in the world, it might be one of those ones that sell out almost every year.
Oh, wow. So can you share with us a quick description of how it was different from the race that you completed just about a month beforehand, Expedition Ozark? That was also a 4 or 5 day race, and that was your first time racing as the four of you. So how was this different as a race, and was it different for you as a team, given that was your first race as a team and this was your second race as a team? Like, did you have a different team dynamic from race to race? Did you have different roles? What were your roles? And Andrea, do you want to take that on?
Sure. So there were a lot of things that were actually the same, the short legs and lots of transitions. Even the elevation change was about the same as what was in the Ozarks. But things that were different, the rain and the bad weather just changed a lot of things. It took away a couple of the paddles. And the very final paddle was just so short, it hardly counted. So that was very different than the Ozarks. As far as our team dynamic, I think it just felt like an extension of it. We'd gotten to know each other in the Ozarks, and hopefully Clay kind of got a better feel for, I guess, just how fluid the roles are in our team. In Ozarks, Chip was our captain primarily, and I'd say in this one, Clay took on that role. He was the one who did all the organizing before the race and had the spot for us and did a lot of captaining type of things during the race. But again, our roles are generally fluid. While Chip was the main navigator, a lot of times Caitlin and I took over the lead nav, and Chip would kind of be behind us, like watching. So this race, we had 2 sets of maps. So it was so great to have 2 navigators and 2 people on the maps. Now, there were 2 sets of maps in Ozarks too, but the way they were laid out, it was just much easier to actually utilize both sets of maps in this race. So I feel like our team roles basically stayed the same, but in that they also always change every race throughout the race. And Caitlin, I think, became Sherpa this race. She's not always Sherpa, but she was pretty hardcore, a few legs in this race. So that was kind of a shifting of roles. So yeah, I think that about answers that, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, Caitlin, so based off of that, experience that you all had in the Ozarks, did you have specific race goals? What were they? How are they different? And is there anything from Expedition Ozark that kind of informed how you were going into Croatia?
Yeah, good question. So in Expedition Ozark, we kind of made a decision early on in the race to short course and and this was based on, some weather decisions. And I think in hindsight, we wouldn't have done that. We ended up in the final ranking in Ozarks actually beating a lot of teams as far as checkpoints go, but being ranked behind them because we were short course. So I think we were really motivated to complete the entire course in this race. So that being said, we went into this race wanting to transition quickly through the 13 or 14 transitions, knowing that that's one of our weaker areas, and knowing that, as Chip said, that's almost in one of the events in itself, getting through the transitions quickly. And we knew we were not going to drop a checkpoint unless we absolutely had to. So as far as race goals go, we were really motivated to stay on the full course as long as we could. And I think we accomplished our goal in that we did. Like, we were one of the last teams on the full course before we finally had to make the decision to short courses. We were, low on time kind of on the last day. So I was glad that we did Ozark together, not only to know how we gelled as a team and to kind of establish roles, but to really motivate us to try to make the full course, and not to drop points early on. And I think we were really proud of what we did and we were able to do, in Croatia because of that.
And one other thing, let me chime in on the especially the roles, and I'm just really impressed with this team, and Clay just was a perfect match. Like, even when we were going into it, we're like, okay, Clay, what do you normally do on your team? He's like, well, I can do team captain, I can do nav. I'm also usually the Sherpa. I'm good on a mountain bike. And I was like, literally everybody on this team not only is able to do every single role, but also capable where they can do it well. So it doesn't matter if I'm having a physical problem, I hand the maps to Caitlin and she can do nav. And if Caitlin gets tired and starts doing the zombie walk, she can hand the maps to Andrea. And then Andrea can hand it to Clay. And it literally, it's the Sherpa role, the team mom role, the team captain role, the nav role. It can roll around to anybody depending on the current situation, the current modality. So I'm super impressed with the entire team on how we were able to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because I know one of the things people struggle with is not wanting to be the weak link. I think probably all of us have that in our brains. Did you have a stated agreement ahead of time? Like, look, if we, offer to carry a bag, if I offer to take navigation, I'm not just being nice. Like, do you have a philosophy about that, Clay? I see you're moving around.
Well, I think, for the newer racer with the more experienced racers, when they say, would you like a tow or would you like us to take some weight? It's generally not a question. It's typically, it's a very strong suggestion that, as in you need a tow or you need to take some weight. And so, midway into day 2, I tweaked my knee on a pretty slippery section, and it was definitely agitating for the rest of the race, mostly on the downhills. And so I got I think it was Caitlin's like, would you like me to take your pack? And so it's one of those like, oh, that wasn't a question. That was that was like, I need to take your pack because you're going to slow us down. So Caitlin, man, hats off to you for like throwing my pack on the back of your pack twice and just, going all out. And so, all I then had to do is hobble along. So, so I think that there's the team really had that understanding of, look, it's a team sport. You're only as fast as the slowest person. And and in that moment, I was definitely the slowest person because I just couldn't move downhill very fast with my knee. And taking the weight of the pack, was just an enormous help. And so it's kind of the team recognized it. I took the hint, or the suggestion or the demand, however you want to look at it. And it was, I think the whole team benefited.
Yeah.
Caitlin, that's a really interesting mindset for you, I imagine, and for the rest of the team, because I think for a lot of newer racers, there's this, I don't know my own capabilities and I don't want to be the weak link. So if I'm feeling strong now, maybe I should save that so that, I'll be ready for anything. So it takes a bit of courage to say, I'm feeling strong now, I'm feeling capable, and I'm just going to trust that somebody else will be feeling strong and help me out if I need that later. Does that sound
Yeah,
familiar?
I mean,
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, and it's at different points during the race. Like, those particular times I was feeling strong on the track, it was a pretty straightforward nav. I think on those times we are kind of on a trail. So it was easy for me to take the pack and go. But, other times during the race, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Like on the bike, there was times on the bike where I was definitely, I would say the weaker link on the team, and I wouldn't have been able to take a pack or tow somebody at that point. So, everyone's got their highs and lows during the race, and it does take, established teams are better at recognizing, who needs help at a given time and just, doing what they need to do to help that person out. I think we're getting there as a team, team disability, and with Clay being new, we wanted to make sure that, he was taken care of, especially with his knee and especially any injury. It's one thing to be tired, but it's another thing to actually have an injury and not want to make it worse, and I think, definitely taking weight off your shoulders does make a tremendous amount of difference, especially with something like a knee injury. So yeah, it's just dependent on the race. I was feeling strong at that particular time, and I'm glad I was able to help Clay out. And I think he's right. It did help the team as a whole because we were able to get off that leg faster and move on to the next.
And one other thing, when the knee injury happened, I mean, it's like it was just pouring down rain. I mean, these are not trails. These were like very steep, rooty, slippery, overgrown, just crazy. And so the minute the injury occurred, like Caitlin said, we're not dealing with somebody that's tired. We're dealing with something that is bad and could get worse. And so it didn't stop raining for like 50 hours. And so Caitlin was able to basically very quickly run across the mud and run down hills and run up hills and not be concerned. Meanwhile, Clay is using poles and trying to make sure that he doesn't slip and fall again and make it worse. So I think that was another thing that it was a really smart move on our part. There's no argument. It was Clay was like, here's my bag. And that way he could be careful. That was the main thing. We've had a teammate have to drop because of a knee injury before. And it's like, it's no joke. Once your knees are out, you're out of the race. And that we did not want that to happen. So I thought the team worked together really well on that.
So I have one more thing to say about that too. You mentioned like when you feel strong, you might feel like you should save that for yourself for because you're going to be weak in the future. I think the more you race, you realize that doesn't really work. And so you give more in the moment. Like I find now that I don't ask myself about tomorrow or the next day or the next leg. It's like, how do I feel exactly right now? And how much can I give right now? And I think that's partly experience that tells you can do more than you think you can, and you might as well try. But that's just what I feel like I've learned over the race.
I think that's a really, really like insight worth repeating. Anyone watching this, like rewind and hear that again. And I have heard of teams who have a team rule, like someone is always on tow. So when you see people on tow, there can be all kinds of things going on in the background of that team's philosophy and approach. So it's fun to hear about different methods. But I do have a question. So I was paying attention along with my husband, Jason Andrus, and we were enjoying all the commentary, and just I've been loving the commentary on both these races. They're so helpful, and a lot of it comes from Jason Magnus has been insightful and fun and interesting, and we've really enjoyed those. And he brought up a term that I hadn't heard before, but I said, oh yeah, that's something I identify with. I think he called it a racecation team. And I was like, that's something to be proud of. But he was sort of juxtaposing that with a more competitive team, and how Team thisABILITY has had races where he's kind of wondering, is there a difference in approach between a kind of a racecation or a vacation-y attitude versus a more competitive team? Have you guys thought about that distinction? Is that something that you are consciously thinking about? Are you making a conscious transition?
I guess you guys want me to get into that one? You know me, I'm like itching to.
Oh, Chip, go for it.
I'll do my side. I think this is something we should spend some time on, especially since our podcast is usually educational in nature. So much of the commentary about adventure racing, especially at the expedition level, is about the podium. Who's going to win it, right? We're all in our, other than Caitlin, of course, we're all in our 50s now, especially since I just had my birthday yesterday. So the podium, especially on an international race, is so far out of our reach. We might as well be up against Tiger Woods. I mean, the people that are, the Swedish Armed Forces or the Estonians, I mean, they're just phenomenal athletes. And to get into the top 20 is hard. To get into the top 15 is really hard. And to get into the top 10, you got to be like amazing. And then top 5 on an international race is like you are literally in the 0.00 something % of endurance athletes in the world. So I think Jason and the team at Bend Racing, I mean, they are in that level. They are like every day they're training. They're trying to continue to be at that peak performance level, and they do coaching for a lot of teams and athletes to maintain that. And you can see it in their performance. I mean, Chelsea just shows up to the World Mountain Bike, finals and blows everybody out of the water by hours. Like, it's just their level is a different level. Our level is a little different. Okay, we are competitive, meaning we want to do our best. We want to push our limits. We don't want to dilly dally around and just blow the race and throw it all away. But on the other hand, we're also, I want to experience Croatia. I want to have a lot of fun with these teammates. I want to have the most unbelievable, amazing experience that's life-changing. If I want to stop and take a photograph of these beautiful scenery, and I want to do it. And so it's one of those, sometimes we're super competitive and we're going fast. And another time, as we're probably going to talk about, there's a restaurant across the way that looks like it'd be really good. And we're going to sit down and we're going to have a nice hot meal and relax. And it's going to be one of the most seared memories in my brain for that race. And I'm glad we took the extra 20 minutes to do it. Mm-hmm. So, competitive doesn't mean you're competitive to the podium. I think competitive means, we've got all these other United States teams, like there's Checkpoint Zero, and we're kind of competitive with them and yada, yada. But at the end of the day, I think the average racer that does these international races is really there just to have an amazing experience with their team, to push their personal limits. You're up against yourself. You're not up against the podium teams. And I kind of like that philosophy. So yeah, we're known, Andrea and I were known, like when we go to a race, we're going to go a week early, week and a half early. We're going to experience the culture. We're going to go to the parks. We're going to video it and try to share our experience with others. And then also when the race is over, we try to hang around after the race. We're going to go to the after party. We're going to chat with the other teams. These are the most amazing people on the planet. And so we've got some really, really awesome friends, both from teammates and racers, as well as the volunteers. These people are amazing. So the idea to show up at an international race right at the last minute, right before the race the race, go as fast as you can, don't take any photos, suffer the whole time, and then leave and don't participate in the after stuff. I don't understand how they do it like that.
I am chomping at the bit to chime in here.
Okay.
Because I think you're making it sound like we're too relaxed and that it's all vacation, which it absolutely is not. And there is a balance. Like, I agree with you. We're not a podium team, but at the same time, we are a team that has goals that we've established and we want to do our best. So, we came across that restaurant at almost ideal timing, a time when mentally we thought, oh, we're still going to be able to clear the course. Like, we really thought we were doing well on our time estimates. And just the way it played out, it was perfect timing. But then, not long after, I don't even know, in a matter of hours, we're in a totally different situation where we've ordered coffee and then we realize, oh no, we're not even going to make it to the finish with the mandatory points if we stay here and have coffee. So you chugged the coffees and we left because that time was not the time to have a vacation. That time was to race. So I think it all comes down to your goals and hopefully everybody being on the same page with when and how to either adjust your goals or to, say, yeah, this is the time to take advantage. But I don't know, maybe since we're on the topic, maybe Clay should actually tell you guys about that experience at that restaurant.
So, okay. Well, I think all of us, you know, all of us were trying to figure out, manage our manage our nutrition throughout the race. And fortunately, most of the TAs had hot water boiling. So we were able to, get a few more Mountain House meals than normal. So it wasn't all processed foods. But we roll in this TA. It had finally stopped raining, although we were still kind of pretty muddy, drowned rats. And we there's a kind of a bar coffee shop next door, and we're kind of looking in it, and there's a Croatians definitely smoke and like to smoke in coffee houses, and it was it wasn't really kind of exactly where we've been, and we're looking across the street, and there's this restaurant. So walk over there, walk in, the maitre d' is there, and he kind of greets us. We're like, are you open for lunch? He's like, I don't open till 5, and it's, I think, barely noon. Then he kind of looks us he kind of looks us up and down, and I'm not sure it's because we're like totally muddy and wet, or he's thinking like, well, here's 4 people who are going to be in and out of here fast and drop a couple €100. He's like, I'll open for you. And we walk into the restaurant. It looks like a small wedding venue, the chairs with like covers on them. It's fancy, fancy china. It's a really very nice restaurant, and we're about to sit down, and he speaks decent English, and I'm like, we're pretty gross. Are you sure you want to sit on their chairs? And he kind of, hold on a minute. He runs out and he brings out 4 pillows to kind of cover his very fancy chairs, sits us down. Of course, we're the only people in the restaurant because they're not technically open. So we're kind of talking to ourselves, well, at least he'll have plenty of time to like clean up after us, because, we're kind of traipsing in mud and whatnot. We order food. We say, we'll be back in 15 minutes. We rush across the street. We totally disassemble our bikes, get them in the bike boxes, check that task off the list, come back over just as bread and soup and salads are all coming out, and have this fantastic, Michelin star meal. Chip, you got Chip and Andrea got like the venison special. Caitlin and I had steak with the most amazing potato things. And Chip ordered a glass of wine, which turned out not to be a glass of wine, but a carafe of wine. So I just had to share it with him. Anyway, so we're in and out of there in 15-20 minutes. Of course, this is so un-European. I mean, this is supposed to be, you're supposed to go and sit there for 3 hours and enjoy the meal. So we're like, oh, and then pay the bill, out of there, back across the street. So, but it was
Wow.
It was super memorable. And that's one of the highlights of, is that vacation racing? I don't know, but we were well nourished, well fed. We got a good nap after that. I think we then went and slept for 60-90 minutes, and we all felt great, and kind of super well nourished after that.
And Andrea, how was that warm towel?
Oh,
That might have been the best part of that, because when we sat down, he brought out a plate with hot washcloths, and we were all just like loving them. I think, yeah, that just felt so wonderful, because we'd been so cold for so long. It was just so nice to feel something warm. And, of course, it was a 4-course meal. Like, I don't know how we did it so quickly, but it was really one of the fanciest meals I think I've maybe possibly ever had.
It was amazing.
Sometimes race directors throw in special things that make you feel good. Like, rootstock racing will also often have like grilled cheeses at 3 a.m. And I thought that was, absolute race highlight, only to be surpassed by the hot towel. So for the race directors out there listening to this, if you want to make your racers happy, have hot towels at some point midway through the race.
I have three things to say about that. One, that restaurant tour is probably telling the story about you guys right now, because I'm sure that was a highlight for him too. Two, it sounds like that might have been a race strategy that left you feeling rested, maybe a bit of a like, well played, team thisABILITY, you know, that sort of stoke boost. And then, of course, nourished. I mean, nothing like a hot meal. So it could, you know, for me, that's kind of threading this needle between competitive racing and a racecation. It sounds like this was a multi-purpose moment. And then it also, Chip, what you started out saying just reminds me of how many different races there are within a race. You know, how many, that's one of the things about adventure racing that's so fun for me, is that in the same race, you have all these different approaches, all these different attitudes, all these different goals, and they can switch within a race for a given team. So it kind of brings me to my next question, which was, there were races within the race. So not everybody was experiencing the same race. But one thing that came up when we were all talking about you online as you were racing was, is there a inside race going on between the two top USA teams with you all and Checkpoint Zero? Was that something that was in your heads, or were we just talking about it? And if so, how did it influence your race? And Caitlin, you're back.
Yeah, so Checkpoint Zero. So, you know, it's kind of like I don't know, I feel like it's kind of like a sibling rivalry. You know, you're always the most competitive kind of with the teams you know the best, right? So we were definitely keeping an eye on the American teams. You know, Checkpoint Zero is a very, you know, good team. I mean, they're well established. They've been around for a long time. They've got some very respectable finishes, you know, in the last 10 years or so. You know, we knew that they were going to be a competitive team in the race, you know, right off the bat. But they came into the race with some challenges, right? One of their team members didn't have his gear. You know, he did manage to get, you know, what he needed, but, you know, there's always the mental aspect of starting the race, you know, just not quite there, right? So we were keeping an eye on them, as well as some of our other friends that we knew. It was kind of fun because we ran into them like a couple times on the course. At one point, we were going for a very difficult optional CP early on. It was hard to tell from the maps and from where you guys were on your vantage point really how difficult this point was. But there were probably about 10 teams all going for this point, you know, in the pouring down rain and the mud all at the same time. And it was a tough point to get to. And then we had to make a navigation decision. And I think this was questioned online. We went toward the west and did kind of a very wide track, whereas most of the other teams, including Checkpoint Zero, did more of a direct route to go back to the TA. And we had our reasons for doing that. And so, you know, essentially that put us a little bit behind them. And then once we got to the TA, we were a little motivated to move a little faster, you know, to get out of there based on, you know, where they were sitting in the race. So, you know, I would definitely say it was kind of a friendly rivalry, and that we were keeping our eye on them just because we knew they were a top US team that was, you know, going to do well in the race and traditionally very good. So yeah, it was fun to run into them, you know, and leapfrog with them for, you know, throughout the race. So, yeah.
And the other thing, like she said, when they didn't have their gear, like we went out of our way to make sure they had the gear. We gave them a strobe light that they needed. We were handing them stuff. I think there were some carabiners. So it was like we weren't in competition until the race started, right? These are friends of ours. So these are like two people playing golf and they kind of talk shit. But at the end of the day, they're going to have beers afterward. That's the rivalry. These are just a bunch of friends having a good time out in the woods. But yeah, during the race, we were competitive. But on the other hand, like the checkpoint that Caitlin's talking about, like Shane and I came together and we talked about, okay, there's an upper route, a middle route, and a lower route. And at the end of the day, they went one way and we went the other. But we collaborated on that point, kind of. It was, you know, so it's 1 minute you're in competition, the next you're side by side, you're just having a chat with friends and having a good time. So and then of course towards the end, you know, we're of course keeping track of them because it'd be fun to beat Checkpoint Zero because they're a really good team. And then all of a sudden, I think you guys would probably agree, like we're like, wait, why isn't Checkpoint Zero here yet? Like, why are they so far behind us? Something must be wrong. And it went from being competitive to now I'm concerned about them. And again, they had some trouble towards the end of the race, and so we rightfully should have been concerned. And we'll let them talk about that on their podcast. But so it's it's a fun competition. It's not like Swedish Armed Forces versus the Estonians, or
Yeah, right.
And Shane and I talked after the race. We would love to race together sometime. Like we've gone back and forth so many times. Just like Kate with you. I mean, I hope one day we get to race together. I'm so glad we got to race with Clay. You may have lost a teammate, by the way, but he fit in so well with our team. But either way, when it comes down to Shane and that whole team, I would race with any of them anytime. They're great people.
Well, adventure racing is very much a web. I mean, when you look at the teams and how everybody moves among teams, it's, I think, pretty common. Yeah. So I have on my list to come back to some of the navigation decisions, like the one that you just brought up later. We can put a pin in that for later, or dig into that particular decision now while we're on the topic. Or I can I did want to hear, maybe before we get into that, just hear Andrea talk a little bit about the last kind of big picture question, which is just preparing for this race. It's an international race, and you guys have done a lot of domestic races in the United States. You've done a lot of international races. And I think for so many people, traveling for a race out when you can't drive, flying is sort of level 1. And then doing that with an international component is level 2. And just wondering how, maybe you even have tips for organizing your gear and for planning. I know you like a good spreadsheet. But I think it's pretty mystifying for a lot of people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on racing internationally and any kind of tips you have.
Well, I don't know if my tips are that great, but I am getting a little better at it, probably just because of the experience doing it. But, an international race always feels like the stakes are a little bit higher. It's like it's more expensive to get to where you're going. And, for any one of the teammates to either not have their stuff or not be able to make it to the finish, it feels like you're more invested in the experience. So the stress is totally real. And it starts before you leave, when you're packing. I don't know how many times I checked and rechecked my checklists. Obviously, I think checklists are the way to go. I'm sure everyone else does that too, so that's no pro tip or anything. But yeah, just having those meetings ahead of time, knowing who's bringing what. We did talk afterward, knowing that when bags can get lost, that maybe in the future we'll actually have 2 sets of mandatory gear going with different people. Like, for instance, the first aid kit. Maybe Chip will bring one and Clay will bring another, so that, if one bag gets lost, we still have the backup. And it makes you think twice about what you want to put on your carry-on items. So maybe your most important race stuff you want in your carry-on items so that it doesn't get lost. But it does seem every single race that there is someone who does not get their gear, or does not get all of it, or doesn't get it to the very last minute. So we definitely like to at least leave a day or 2, or as long as we have. We don't have all the free time in the world, even though it might seem like it, but getting there ahead of time really helps that too. So I guess that's pretty much what I've got to say about that.
Those are good tips. So I know that I'm excited to hear about some of the navigation decisions and other things that came up in the race. So we're going to dig into some of the details. And I was hoping, Chip, could you just tell us about the start of the race? When you get your maps, first of all, what was that like for this race? How much time did you have with them? Where was it? Was it on a bus? And then second of all, do you have a team approach for when you get the maps? For example, does each person have a different job? And then the third part of that question is, how do you decide what checkpoints you're going to do? Because I think the top teams, they just know they're going to do all the checkpoints, or that's certainly what they're going to attempt to do. That's one approach. But if you're a team that's trying to pick and choose, that's another kind of strategy and approach to looking at the map. So what was it like when you got the maps? Do you have different roles? Who does what? And how do you think about checkpoints?
So I think I might start backwards on this. We had learned both through the grapevine, because our prior teammate and the guy that did commentary, Tomas Diaz, he had just done the race last year, and he warned us, you don't give up checkpoints. It's like I call it European rules. That many times it's like you go after every checkpoint. You let the race director tell you when you need to skip something. We had also heard from another team, Adventure Addicts, that they had done the year, I think 2 years prior, and they had done American rules, which was they needed to, they knew they were a little falling behind, so they skipped a couple points to move forward in the race, as we normally do in the States and in many other countries. And that's when their ranking stopped. Even though they did very well, they had a lot of checkpoints, they had skipped one, that's when their score stopped. So we had it from multiple different people that were in these European rules where it's not our choice to give up points. We're going to go until we absolutely can't go anymore and then start skipping. So that changed our strategy going into the minute we get the maps. It's pretty much we're doing all the points, because we're pretty sure we were going to be able to clear it, especially when they started to cut the paddle points. We were thinking, okay, we really need to keep going and try to clear it. We came really close. Like Caitlin said earlier, we didn't start skipping until the very last day, over 8 cups of espresso. So the other thing that I thought was really unique in this race, and I would highly recommend other race directors consider it, especially for these big multi-day expedition races. It's kind of, for me, it's irritating when, like, you're getting on the bus for an expedition race and they hand you 26 maps and expect you to figure this stuff out while you're bouncing along with a headlamp at 4 a.m, wondering if the pooper's open. I just think that's unnecessary. Expedition adventure racing should be a lot like an expedition. And so I think that there's a role for planning and strategy. That's kind of one of the sports. And you're never doing that on the fly. If you're going to go up to Mount Everest, you're not going to, let's get the maps the night before we leave. It just doesn't happen. So what he did was he gave us, I think it was 2 hours with the maps in a controlled environment actually 2 days before the race really started. So we're in a room. We had a table, we had lights, we could use our markers, we could use the bathroom, we could hydrate. He wouldn't let us use our phones. So we were on electronic lockdown. But we were able to do our thing with the maps for a couple hours. And that's plenty of time to get the general course laid out, highlight the CPs, maybe write some clues on the map, just generally get your mind wrapped around what you're up against in a potential strategy. Maybe you can identify some cruxes or some cut acrosses, or should we go this way or that way? You can start thinking about it. We did have 2 sets of maps. They were printed front and back, so that was a little bit of a pain in the ass. So we did what I think it was Andrea and I kind of did the first set, and then we handed it over to Clay and Caitlin, and then they duplicated what we did and looked at what we had done and said, hey guys, did you consider this or that? So they were able to do some of the micro nav. Andrea and I were just going as fast as we can to process the maps, thinking we might run out of time. So we do, when it comes down to the technical details, we try to identify all the CPs on the map. We try to either highlight them or use permanent marker to write a larger circle and a little arrow to it, so that when you're 3 days into the race and it's raining and you're doing the zombie thing with the sleep monsters, that you don't miss a CP. Because most of us over 50 have reading glasses and we can miss stuff. So you want these big, like, old people things saying, look, CP dummy. So we did all of that on the maps, and then they allowed us to keep the first 9. No, yeah, they allowed us to keep the first 9, and then maps 10 and up they took back. So we didn't mess with maps 1 through 9 at all. We basically started on map 10 and thoroughly went through that, because we knew we could take 9 home with us and work on that during the overnight or before we went to bed. And luckily, I'm known to piddle around and be mucking with gear. And so Clay and Caitlin stepped up, and they basically cleaned up maps 1 through 9 and did all of the markup. So I could finish getting my gear sorted, because I take too long. I think I answered all 3 of your questions, I think.
Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like you get a big pile of maps. maybe double-sided, maybe more than, 24. And you first just lay them out and try to get them ordered and try to highlight where these checkpoints are. So you can find them on day 3 when you're tired and wet and cold. And then at what point are you sketching out routes and making choices?
We did it at the same time. I think instead of going through 2 different workflows, it was pretty much identify the points on the map, and then sketch a general route. And then again, sometimes Clay and Caitlin would say, "There's this other route we might want to consider." And so there was some chatter back and forth, but a lot of times, kind of the workflow was like, we finish our maps, we hand them over to them, and then they transcribe them. And so most of the route was planned. But it changed, that's for sure, because we got into the race and we were, for example, let me give you an example where I think all teams mess this up. You look at the map, you see point A to point B, the straightest line, and you see a road or a trail or whatever, and you just assume that's going to be the one. And then when you have a chance to actually relax and kind of look at the map as you're trekking down the road, you go, wait a second, that goes up and over a mountain. Like, no damn way are we doing that. We're going to go around and stay on the topo. And so even though we had done our best to map the routes, we started making efficiency changes as we went along, because you've got a lot of time just marching down the road looking at the maps. And, so we were able to adapt on the fly as all navigators should. Another example, again, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter what country you're in, the maps never represent reality well. And so there's these white things, and then there's these black things, and then there's these black hashed things. And one minute the white is a paved road, the next minute the white's gravel, the next minute the white's rocky rubble. One time the hashed things are completely overgrown and terrible, and other times it's like double track a golf cart could drive on. So as a navigator, you really have to sometimes you get to the trailhead and you look and you go, oh, that looks like crap, we're going the other way. And so even though you try your best to plan the route out, you got to be able to make decisions on the fly while you're in the field.
Can you talk about just some of the decisions that you had to make as a team regarding navigation, and which ones were like nailed it and which ones you would do differently or you just didn't work out? Like there was what you alluded to earlier about when you all went west. And Chip, I want to give you a break, but I also know I don't know how you
Well, I'll start with that one if you want, and then I'll shut up and let the others chime in. But that I thought that was a little bit of a crux of the race. And Clay, tell me if I'm wrong. That on that trail is where you bonked your knee, right, and had the injury.
Yeah, it was coming off of the Via Ferrata, and I think we were going to checkpoint 19, and hitting the Via Ferrata at close to midnight. It's just it is pissing rain and wind on the top of this mountain. It was super exciting, but it was pretty treacherous, and it bottlenecked. So when we going up the Via Ferrata, a lot of teams bunched, they were spread out and they really accordioned back together here. And I think it was checkpoint 19, this very deceiving thing that looked like you could just, reach out and grab it, but it's a cliff. So you had to kind of go around, and there's a long bottleneck of, teams going along. And that's where I tweaked my knee, but a lot of people were going down. So that was probably our toughest point.
I know we're talking about navigation here though, but that same slippery trail on the way to 19 is when Chip slipped also. Like it was a mud fest. Yeah, and Chip slipped, and I was right behind him watching, but checkpoint 0 was right in front of us at that point. And Chip went down, and his knee kind of went behind him, and his front leg went forward, and it went right in between Michelle's legs. So he just slid through that with it could have been disastrous. And around the same area, we hear someone in French saying, Meride, Meride, and not pleasantly. Like that guy sounded like he was yelling for his life.
Like he was going off the cliff.
So he thought he was going off a cliff.
It's just kind of worth saying that, and I should have mentioned this before, the differences between domestic races and international races. I feel like the international races give you a little bit more opportunity to take your own risk, to to take as much risk as you want, basically. Like that Via Ferrata, if that race had been in the States, I guarantee you it would have been canceled because it was pouring rain. I mean, there was no lightning, but it was pouring rain. It was dark. There might have even been a dark zone for it. Like, I'm not saying the races here are, completely safe, because there's definitely risky elements in every race we do. But at that point, it was a little bit sketchy, to say the least. And that was played into our decision for how to attack the next point. Not only did we now have a bit of an injury, and we've been through this traumatic experience trying not to fall off the cliff going down this mud path. But I think we did try to attack the next point in a little bit more efficient way, looking at the maps. But then we got down to that point, and like Chip said, sometimes you get to the trail and look around like, well, that's not what we expected. And mentally, we just needed a break from that mess of stuff we were getting through. So when we chose to go west and go on the white road, which in that section of the white road, it really was hard packed. Cars could drive on it. It was a mental break, and it was obviously the longer way around. But also it was very cold. So if we had gotten cold and had an emergency on a not very well trodden trail and we were going slow, I mean, because really the only way to stay warm is to keep moving. And so I remember kind of thinking, like, when we're making this decision, well, if we're on the road, at least we can do some jogging, which we did. Like, I don't know that any of us really wanted to. It didn't feel good. It wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to go run a few miles. But it was just so cold. I felt like my feet were cold, my hands were cold. It's kind of, you feel the extremities get cold first. And then I thought, I kind of feel a creep of cold getting to my core, which is what you should really look out for if you're thinking someone might, if you're feeling like you might get hypothermic. Like, if you don't feel that you can stoke your fire in your chest and in your core, then you might be in trouble. So I don't know. I've gotten a little long-winded there, but that was part of how we decided to take the long way around, which I think took us an extra hour, which is a lot in a race. So was it the right decision or not? I don't really know, but for us at the time, it felt like it. And we did all agree on that, which every decision isn't up for discussion necessarily, because a lot of times there's not a decision to be made. It's just obvious what you're supposed to do. But usually when it's something like that, we do have a discussion, and I don't think anyone was against what we did. I don't know.
But also, Kate, you mentioned it. Sometimes it's a strategy thing, and you get done with it, and you've had a mental break, and you feel a little bit energized. It gave Clay an opportunity to walk on an even surface so that he could kind of assess his knee. And it could have gone the other direction. It could have gone, we took one of the upper routes or middle routes. It could have been bushwhacky, more slippery mud, and he could have injured his knee more, and it took him out of the race. So I thought it was a very strategic play. It wasn't a nav error by any means. It definitely was a decision. It was a strategy. It gave us the mental break, the physical break. Yeah, it may have taken us a little longer, but also it could have been a lot faster. Just who knows how bad those other two trails were. It was much higher on the topo. We knew they were going to be walking along laterally along the topo line, which is really wonky on your ankles and stuff. So going back at it, I mean, if you hadn't told me it took an extra hour, I still probably would pick that route. But one other thing, just because we do try to keep this educational, a lot of people may not know what a Via Ferrata is. So let me just get into that just for a split second. What we were on is like a spine. It was like a drop on the right and the left. It was just a rocky ridge line. Like, think of the back of a dinosaur, and you're going up and over their spines. So Via Ferrata is basically a piece of wire, very, very heavy, like aircraft cable that you see on like a bridge or something. And it lines the spine, both going up and down and across, where there's a drop and there's a lot of exposure on both sides. So it's kind of similar to rock climbing, but basically you have a rock climbing harness, and then you have two tethers, roughly the length of your hands, so that you have carabiners on the end of each of the tethers. And so the idea is that you're always clipped into that cable. And then as you're sliding along that cable, you're going to come to a point where the cable is attached to the rocks. You have to unclip a beaner and clip it back on after the attachment. And then you unclip the second beaner and clip it back on. So you're always attached. The reason you have two is so that you can go from, you can cross over where it's tethered. Where it gets really dangerous which is the bottleneck Clay's talking about. When you're going up or down, if somebody falls, you're going to slide to the next time where that wire is attached to the rock. And then of course, then you fall the length of your Via Ferrata kit. And then there's also a little bundle of extra webbing in the Via Ferrata kit that if you hit really hard, it's going to allow that bundle to let loose as well. So the idea is that you can't be right on top of each other, because if one person falls, they start knocking everybody else down like dominoes. It's one of those things that gives you a false sense of security that you got the Via Ferrata kit, but you really have to mentally think through, if that person falls and you're on like a class 6 boulder scramble in the cold, rainy, mucky, everybody's doing the same thing. So all the mud on people's shoes are on all the rock climbing holds. It was actually a pretty difficult rock climb, especially if anybody wasn't used to rock climbing. And there's a few people that had a lot of problems on there. They're very scared and terrified to go up and over. Luckily, I don't think anybody got hurt on it. But either way, that was like Clay said, it was challenging physically, cold wise, rain wise, but also mentally challenging. And then we went on our muddy, slippery 3-hour, 4-hour mud fest after that. So it was tough.
Oh my God. So, Clay, can you actually talk a little bit about the weather? I don't believe you're my older brother, so I think you're just exaggerating and making the whole thing up. But I did see the pictures of how really muddy, wet, cold, and miserable you all look like wet rats out there. So how was the weather? Did it change your race strategy? And importantly, is there anything you would recommend to people about how they, that you would have done differently? Any recommendations or tips for managing really tough weather conditions like you had?
Yep. Well, pictures do say 1,000 words. And if you're scrolling through, you see day one of the race just is absolutely spectacular. What you could have, what you hoped for in going to Adventure Race in Croatia. And then it kicked in, probably around 10:30 the night of Monday night. And then, as Chip said, probably went for 50 hours or so. And when it rained, it was, it rained hard. It was, it was a driving rain for most of this time. I would say the temperatures dropped into the low 50s, maybe even high 40s. So it certainly was the time that I've think I've felt hypothermic before, but this was so on the cusp of being hypothermic. And I think so one of the strategies is that you just keep moving. Every time, if we stopped, your body temperature just kind of plummets and we're all shaking. And that's why it was like, do I feel like running? No, but just, you do it because that's how we kept warm. And every time we started going up the hill instead of down, it's like, oh my goodness, thank goodness we're going uphill. It seems a little counterintuitive, but you get, you get heated up. For me, it's like, I will never go on a race with clothing that's not, has some kind of thermal properties. I mean, nobody's wearing cotton or anything like that, but the power of wool, is, really helped a lot. I'm just thinking about like my, I've got wool up and down, but then I've got like these, just my bike gloves, just normal bike gloves, and I just couldn't get them on because they are just so cold and clammy. And I'm like, oh, I just want a pair of wool gloves right now. And the amazing, like that space blanket, nobody's ever pulled a space blanket out of their, kit unless it's an emergency, but everyone's got their space blankets out wrapped around themselves. Chip, man, I got on Amazon and I ordered some of those space blanket jackets that you had.
Poncho. Yeah.
The space blanket poncho is like going in my essential gear kit. And then there was one really interesting race decision that on the mandatory equipment list, they had crossed off fire starter and they had crossed off a bothy bag. And so we didn't have either. And this was probably the one race I've ever been in that, we didn't need it. But if something had gone wrong, like if somebody got in a flat tire and we had a 20-minute tire change and, one person's changing and the other three are, sitting there shivering, they're that kind of, or if say my knee or another injury came about, It could have been. It was pretty sketchy if that, if we got ourselves in that kind of a pickle, that this was the race to have a bothy bag if there ever was one. And not just a piece of weight that, we're always carrying around. Felt like it would have been a added, added piece of assurance, because the other thing is that it was a rural race. We were really out in the middle of nowhere for most of this race. The second half, there were some towns and villages we went through, but a lot of it were, deep wilderness.
Nowhere to hide.
Right. Did it change your
So I,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I'm speaking up for Caitlin because she's sometimes quieter than I am. But I noticed that like the first couple of legs, none of us took our bivy sacks because that was also not a requirement. But then the next leg, after we had such a cold night, I know that Caitlin took her bivy sack. I was like, if she took it, it must be cold. So you might not be able to trust Clay saying it's cold, but when Caitlin says it's cold,
It was cold. It was
I
the coldest I've ever been in a race.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And so, did it change your strategy at all? I mean, you mentioned a few examples already, but do you think how did it, for example, the Stoke? I mean, it's hard to be that cold and wet for that long.
I think, so the Tuesday and Wednesday that it rained, it forced us to constantly move. So it almost made us go a little bit faster through the race. But I think we were more tired. We tip, in a typical race, I think we stop more, we take more naps, we kind of enjoy ourselves a little bit more. But, we were pushing Tuesday and Wednesday, like for about 48 hours, like through the whole rain, because like Clay said, you just couldn't stop. And and we were exhausted. We were tired. And I think part of the reason was too, I was thinking about it during the race, is typically we'll have paddling sections where your legs get a rest, and I mean, the only paddling section was 3 hours, 2.5 or 3 hours at the very end of the race. Otherwise, it was literally track, bike, track, bike, track, bike, track, bike. You were constantly using your legs, and and so about for 48 hours, we really pushed, and we only slept at the TAs. And so I think the strategy was move fast to stay warm, and don't dawdle, which we did. And then finally, when the weather broke on Thursday, we were on a long bike, and I think we really enjoyed ourselves. I mean, we took a long time for that bike, and we stopped. The weather was gorgeous. It wasn't exactly warm, but it definitely wasn't raining, and the sun was out. So we kind of took our time more and enjoyed that. It was our last full day on the course, and so we took our time on that Thursday and really enjoyed ourselves. So I do think the weather did dictate some of our strategy, but really just by necessity, because we just needed to stay warm and keep moving.
Actually, Caitlin, can you keep talking about some of those major decision points? So there was the major decision points probably around whether you're going to full course, but did you have any as a part of that? Within that, were there any particularly difficult decisions or decisions that you felt, were an impactful moment? And of course, I remember in the last race in the Ozarks, you and Chip had a little like, oh, do we have time? Don't we have time for?
Yeah.
What was it? Andrea goes, oh, my precious checkpoints, this sort of Chip's approach.
Well,
so any moments like that?
Yeah, good question. So I think we're definitely very motivated to try and full course, just based on how we did at Ozarks. And so the primary decisions were, how long do we stay at TAs? And we stayed at TAs probably a little longer than we wanted, but a lot of that was because of the weather. Like, we got to the TAs, and we had just pushed through 12 straight hours of no rest. We were soaking wet, cold. We just needed some recovery time. And also that was our chance to sleep. Like, the first 3 days, we did not sleep out on the course because you literally couldn't. So, thankfully at the TAs, just about all of them had some sort of indoor sheltered area to sleep. And we really took advantage of that. And we slept at every single indoor TA for probably about 2 to 3 hours. And then we would take another, like maybe 2 hours or hour and a half to transition. So, we were at the TAs for probably anywhere between 3 and 5 hours. And so primary decisions early on were how long to stay at TAs, which, we tried to do the best we could, but, a lot of it was just, just necessity as far as getting in, needing to get all of our wet stuff situated, recover, eat. We couldn't really eat anything hot on the course at all, because of the rain, and sleep. So the TAs ended up being longer, which was fine. I mean, we needed those stops at the TAs. And then later down the line, I think the last decision we really had to make was really at midnight on the very last day of the course. I think it was midnight Thursday. We rolled in and we really had to make a decision if we were going to try to push full course still, or if we were going to have to skip some points to make it by the 4 p.m. Friday deadline. And so I specifically remember we rolled into that last TA and I pulled out the maps and I looked at it. And, we decided to sleep for an hour and then try to go for it. But we started out kind of thinking, if we pushed hard, maybe we would have a chance at making it. But it quickly became apparent that, the way the rate we were moving, we weren't going to be able to do it early on. So we more or less kind of took our time, somewhat. We weren't in any rush when we kind of realized, hey, we're going to skip the last optionals on the trek and the bike, just get the rest of the Mandos and go in. This was kind of a funny time during the race. Funny, I say, because I almost made a critical error because I'm the one that looked at the maps and I kind of back math how long it would take us to get to the end with only getting the mandatories. But I made a critical error in that. It's probably a rookie mistake. I don't typically look at the maps too closely. Chip does that, but I didn't look at the altitude or the elevation. And so what I thought was going to be a 45-minute, 3-mile trek from the, one Mando CP to a TA was actually like an up and over like a mountain path kind of thing. And we were literally sitting at this coffee shop, kind of looking at the maps and coming to this realization right when some of the race staff came by and they looked at us and they said, "Are you okay?" Which is basically code for "What the heck are you doing?" and it was funny because we had just realized, like, oh my God, we got to go like up this freaking mountain to get to the TA. It's not just like a flat on the road. And so, I mean, we booked it out of there so fast and I grabbed Clay's pack and we ran. I mean, we ran up this mountain for like an hour and a half. I mean, we were never so motivated. And I was like, crap, like I was just thinking the whole time, like, we were kind of like taking our time and lollygagging a little bit and enjoying ourselves because we kind of knew the race was coming to an end. And I almost screwed it up because we almost, didn't make it in time. I mean, so thankfully it worked out. We got to the end with 30 minutes to spare, but not without some stress.
That was quite the mountain run. You grabbed my bag. Chip's busy like bladders of water, like just draining water and he's carrying all this weight. Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't have my bag because I've got rocks to fend off these dogs that are chasing us.
Yep.
Quite the.
Oh my God.
Wait, pause. Yeah. What are these dogs that are chasing you?
Oh, they're friendly dogs and not so friendly dogs in Croatia, like in many countries. And we'll just say I got efficient at fending off a few overly aggressive menacing dogs.
No dogs were injured in this race. It was just the act of picking up a rock and flinging it. They get the picture that we are the one with the thumb and we win.
Well, there's the other one I kicked, but
oh yeah, on the bike he hit that dog square in the nose.
There's a dog chasing a look. I mean, that's not on the dog. If the dog gets that close to you that you can kick it in the schnoz from your bike, it's too close.
It's too
So-
close. No, it was a legit. You needed to do that.
This
His
is
trail
not
name
the
was
nice
Kung Fu.
Ozarks.
Yeah.
Not the nice dog from the Ozarks that like kept everybody company on the big hill.
Oh,
we
yeah,
got
no,
harassed by
that's
dogs there too. So
No, okay. See, so all those rocks that I snuck into your pack when you weren't looking, that was I
very
had
handy.
I had good motivation for that. Wasn't just a prank. So, any other navigation strategies that you feel particularly good about or particularly bad about?
Andrea, tell them about the Croatian lady in that red car that basically would not let us pass. That was a good story.
That was such
One
a
of my
strange
questions for you is
experience.
about interactions with other teams
Oh,
or
this
local
is great.
people. So
This is
here,
So Chip might even need to chime in on this one, but we were going around some flooding. We were in a bike leg and we had to get somewhere a little bit differently than we thought we would. And we started going up and over a pass and a lady stopped, like came driving around us and stopped us and just was really, really adamant that we could not go forward. Like she was motioning us to go around. She didn't speak English. And of course we didn't understand what she was saying. But just so adamant that we could not go the way we were going. And she said things like, if you go that way, you're going to be crying. She made the sign for crying. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. So, I mean, wouldn't be the first time I cried in an adventure race, but
Yeah, she
I don't
parked her car in the middle of the road. She got out in the pouring rain. I mean, it was raining. And she
Yeah.
got out of the rain and she was doing, I mean, just an animated, like, and just speaking in, I don't know what she was speaking in, Croatian or whatever, but she was just basically motioning, you cannot go that way. No, 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 no. And we must have sat there for 20 minutes because we really wanted to go that way because the only alternative was to go back and all the way around. And, if she would have been an American, like we would have been like, okay, thanks, cool, but we're going to go this way anyway. And we would have gone. But she was not having it. There was no way that she was going to let us pass. Like, even if we were like, oh, thank you. And we would have tried to make the motion to go around her car. She was not having it. Like, she was so stoic about it. And it's in the rain. Like, she was in the rain and she stood her ground. And she even got her phone out. Like, she was going to try to call somebody to translate for us. And we finally just gave up. We were like, all right, this lady isn't having it. Like, we are just not going to be able to pass her. So
I also got the sense though that she was being kind. Like she wasn't standing her ground because of, private property or anything. She really felt like she was doing the best thing for us, for our best interest. So that helped me think.
Knew where we needed to go. So, she was following the race or met other racers because she was pointing, like, no, you need to go, you're going here. You have to go this way. So we don't know whether.
When I was looking back on like some of the discussion about the race, I do think there was some discussion about that particular point in that racing decision. And I do think I saw where like one team had gone that way and it had put like an extra 4 hours on it. Like that road was non-existent. Like, it was like going to be a bushwhack through the forest, and it did not end well for a variety of teams. So ultimately, I think she did us a huge favor by telling us to go around. So she was trying to help us out, and I really do think that was a very good thing for us, and that ended up saving us some time.
Yeah, there was a big elevation change. The town that we were trying to get to, that she probably lived, to the town that we wanted to be at as we went through her town. When you look at the topo, it was a trail that went straight up the topo, and the topo was 10-meter topo lines, and there was no switchbacks. It was just straight up. So I have a feeling Caitlin's right that it was that trail on the map was there from like, the 1600s or something, and it was no longer there. And the other thing, and I think this is the United States, again, you can kind of maybe be a little more lax on this, but we're in a foreign country, and we don't want the race director to have complaints from their locals because these stupid Americans, because of course we have our flag on our shoulder, these stupid Americans were like, piss off, we're going anyway, they go pound sand. So we want to keep the locals happy. And I think just to be respectful of her, even if she was wrong, I think it was the right thing to do for any team to say, okay, let's just go around. It isn't that big of a deal. And we came across Dardingle. They were right behind us, and we came through and we stopped them and said, hey, there's some lady that said don't go that way, and she was adamant. And they're like, are you sure? Because this is the way to go. We're like, no. And they did the same thing. They said, it's not worth pissing off the locals. If thisABILITY says don't go that way, then don't go. And they went around as well. I think it was a respectful thing to do for the local culture, and it was probably the right nav decision.
Probably the right nav decision. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you want to, when you're navigating, did you have any moments of doubt about where you were, and what do you do in those moments as a team? So say you're like, I'm not quite sure where we are. Are there questions you ask yourself? Do you have other sort of navigation techniques or strategies? Do you guys pace count? Do you time, you use a timer? What are some of your tricks and tips, especially if you're not sure where you are?
So this was an interesting race because, generally when we race, there's a lot of times when the checkpoints are hidden and you're doing a lot of micro nav, you're pace counting, you're second guessing where you are. And in this particular race, because it was an expedition, the hardest part was determining the most efficient route from A to B. And I think once you determine that route, it was relatively easy to navigate it. Now, the hard part is you may not have picked the most efficient route, or the road you were on wasn't really a road. It's this crappy trail, and you got to decide, well, do you push through it? Do you back out and try somewhere else? I think what really helped us this time around is, what Andrea alluded to. We had two sets of maps. We really had two navs on nav at all times. And I can tell you there was so many times during the race where one of the navs, let's say Chip, would say, okay, we're going to go this way. And Andrea would be like, wait a minute, are you sure we want to go this way? I think we need to go this way. And then Chip would, do a double take and be like, oh yeah, you're right. There's a lot of times where we caught ourselves like that. And just because you're tired, you're trying to go fast, or whatever it is. But the two navs really made the difference as far as staying on track and not really getting lost. I don't really think there was a time where we were lost. I think, we made a lot of micro decisions about what road to take or how to get from A to B. And there was a couple times when we would catch each other. The secondary nav would catch the first nav just saying, hey, we got to go north. And then he would turn south and start heading south and be like, hey, I thought you said we had to go north. And he's like, yeah, let's go north. And he's still heading south.
I think there's a challenge in these bigger races that are like that with the 1 to 25,000 scale maps, is that sometimes you expect to see the details and they're not there. And sometimes vice versa, there's detail there when you don't expect it. So like a lot of times the path on the map looked a little straighter than the path in real life. So we'd be like saying, oh no, we're going west or north or whatever direction. We're going this direction for too long. I'm like, yeah, but we're still kind of generally going this one direction. Yeah. So a few times, we had to catch ourselves and make sure that it wasn't just a turn, it was just a squiggle in this broader feature. So that was a little bit challenging for us. But then, and another feature, like once we stepped over a stream that, in a different scale of map would be on the map, but in the scale map we were using, it shouldn't have been there. And we were kind of just misjudging the scale of the map, basically. So that was kind of challenging. And always orienting the map if you're at a place where you don't know where you're at. Like there was an error that on the bike. So Chip and I both agreed to go the wrong direction. And the way we noticed that we were not where we thought we would be, because the road took a turn that it shouldn't. So, and it was actually an off limits road. We're like, oh shoot. So of course, to get to where we needed to be, we could have taken the off limits road for a very short section, but it was off limits. And, we don't want to do the wrong thing. So that meant we had to backtrack and go back down and back up. So it cost us in elevation and morale. And But in hindsight, it wasn't like a huge error. It's not like we didn't figure out where we were. Once we were in the wrong place, we figured out quickly where we actually were. So I don't know.
How
What
are you
about you, Chip?
estimating?
You're the lead nav, and Caitlin and I have been talking about our tips and tricks. What about yours?
Yeah, all of the above, everything you're saying is really good. And going back to the error that we made on that off limits road for anybody that's watching this, if you recognize your mistake and you turn around and you correct it, then the referee doesn't penalize you. So just the fact that we were on the off limits road, because we stopped and we turned around and went all the way back around, we didn't take the shortcut, we didn't get penalized. But if we would have just said, screw it, it's only a couple hundred meters, we're just going to do it, then we would have had an advantage, and the referee probably would have penalized us. And the penalty is always worse than the advantage that they gave you. So just for anybody, just if you ever do that, just do the right thing and turn around, and they'll probably let you slide. Basically, your penalty is because you had to go all the way back around, and we had climbed like a couple hundred meters of elevation, and it really sucked. So in addition to what they said, because everything they said was perfect, Clay and I were really, really militant on resetting the altimeters often. Again, we've got this storm that's coming in and going, and it's raining and it stops, and it's raining and it stops. So luckily the map, a lot of times the high points or trail intersections would have an altitude. And I'd say, hey, Clay, it's what are you at? We're supposed to be at 345. And if we were within a small margin, we'd leave it. If not, we would recalibrate. So we were pretty good and militant on that. And that helped us a lot on knowing where we were. The other thing is, of course, always just following the compass to know generally, are we going in the right direction? But also in any country, the trails on the map are basically put there by a human, most likely. They're probably not going on Strava global heat map and actually tracing the actual GPS track. They're just approximations. And so I think the most important part is doing the terrain association, because that probably has not changed. It's a mountain. It's a spur. If you're watching your altitude, what spur you're on. It doesn't matter what the trail is. I know where I am on the mountain based on the compass, the altitude, and the spur. So a lot of these trails, they just petered out, and Caitlin and I are just basically skirting the topo, doing boulder scrambles, and just generally flowing through the terrain without any trails. It takes a lot of experience to get comfortable with that. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet, which was really amazing, I'd never seen anything like it. This terrain, it looked like a B-52 bomber had just dropped bombs and blown these huge pits in the ground. And so in the United States, we have re-entrance, right? I mean, rain hits a mountain and it falls down, and you got these like basically gullies that get bigger and bigger and bigger until they get to the bottom, and then they eventually connect to a river. Croatia was like pitted with these just massive 30 to 50 foot deep, just pits. And so all the water just collects in the pits and goes down and breaks through the limestone and then pops up, way down at the bottom. And a river will just burst out of a mountain. It doesn't come from re-entrance. It comes from just fissures inside the rock. And so as the one that comes most to mind is Caitlin and I were kind of navigating around this mountain, and there's these pits everywhere, and we're kind of navigating around through these pits. I had never seen anything like that. And the other thing, again, the topo lines are 10 meters. So a 30-foot pit doesn't even show up on the map. But there it is. There's this huge depression in the ground that if you fell into, you couldn't get back out of. Not on the map. And so either way, when it comes down to nav, I think the thing is the terrain association is the kind of the default. And then if the trail is accurate, then it's accurate. But if it's not, you need to be ready to mentally just dismiss the trail and continue to follow the terrain.
And how are you estimating? Can you tell everybody how you estimate distance in unusual terrain that's new to you, like what you just described?
Yeah, you mentioned pace counting. We did both pace counting and time. Again, if you're kind of looking, everybody's got their own pace count. I think mine's like 62. It depends on your leg length. But also, it's hard when you're going up and down. Of course, point A to point B on a map is two-dimensional. Meanwhile, you add in 600 meters of elevation change. You have to kind of mentally just add a little bit because it's not two-dimensional. Timing is the other thing that we did a lot of, where it's like we come to a trail intersection and say, okay, it's 9:35. Everybody remember 9:35, and then that way, as we're progressing down the trail, if we've gone for 35 minutes, We can kind of estimate basically if you're at a fast pace walking down a flat dirt road, walking, not AR shuffle, but just marching pretty fast with a brisk thing. It's usually about 10 minutes per kilometer or 1 minute per 100 meters. And so then you can kind of say, okay, but we're going uphill, it's going to be slower. Downhill, it's a little faster. If you're bushwhacking, it's a little slower. You can make it, I'm thinking like if I'm going up a reentrant in the United States, 200 meters, I'm thinking it's going to be about 1.5 minutes per 100. And so that way I know when I've gone too far. I mean, it's very loose. It's just an approximation. But we were using both time and pace counting to get through some of this so that we didn't make any huge errors.
Okay, that's really helpful. So I know it's getting towards dinner time there. Can you, Clay, talk a little bit about your food? We heard about the great meal, but what did you do the other time? And do you eat in a special way, like as part of your training or to prepare for a race? So can you talk about your nutrition both during the race, but also before and after?
Well, I was trying to make a much better attempt at getting in as much real food as possible because I find that when I'm just I also go with a lot of, the spring energy gels, the honey wafers, the Nature Valley granola bars. But I find if that's all I'm having, by the end of an expedition race, my mouth is just destroyed. It gets, my tongue gets really beat up from that. So we were supplementing, fortunately there was hot water in most of the, not all, but many of the TAs. So we were each able to grab a Mountain House meal or the equivalent of, and, either, scarf some of that down in the TA or as we're hiking along. And then, we more towards the second half of the race, I think we are all pretty tired of what we had for food. And so there are lots of little, grocery stores and little things that we could dash in and out of. So there was probably a handful of times we went into a grocery store and, grabbing yogurt, blocks of cheese, slices of salami, and, and then kind of scarfing that down in the parking lot or, on the trail. And that was, you grab a cold Sprite, a cold Coke, and keep going. So we definitely went out of our way to, hit a few of these, one large grocery store and several small ones. And I think that, that kept us going through the second half of the race.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did anybody have an icky stomach? And do you have any tips for what happens when your stomach turns? Pepsid?
Well, I definitely had bad tummy, and I think it was more than just I think it was more food poisoning because it was unpleasant for a little while there, and but it passed, and carbonated Sprite really helped kind of calm things down, impressively, and lots of Tums. I was munching, kind of every hour or two, I'm munching more Tums. I was just churning through them.
And what was that stuff you ate? I think it was called sludge or something like that.
Sludge? I don't remember.
No, the white, it was like it looked like cottage cheese, but you were like, this is the best sludge I've had,
Slog.
Slog, that's it.
Slog, which is just basically like, I don't know, it was freaking awesome. I think it's just like, it's like ultra rich. It's like a pint of Ben and Jerry's vanilla ice cream. It was Schlog.
That they were selling it in the stores there.
Yeah, it was in a grocery store, and we're kind of rummaging through the freezer cabinet with all the ice creams, and I'm like, Schlog looks good. I'm gonna try that. And it was.
Oh wow. You get it for the name, right? So
I'll tell you, on the nutrition thing, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I did try something completely new, which was a little bit dangerous, but it ended up working out. Andrea and I read the Primal Blueprint book, which is a little bit about eating kind of paleo. We don't adhere to it perfectly, but basically it's removing all of the crappy carbs out of your life, like the grains and rice and corn and wheat and potatoes, and basically eating pretty much, meats, fats, vegetables, fruits, things like that. The more strict you go, the more it's like, oh, you can't even eat beans because beans weren't made, they're made by humans, blah, blah, blah. But this was the first race. Normally I do the low carb thing, and then inside the race, I start eating carbs again, but then I have tummy issues. So like, for example, I'm gluten-free, but I'll eat gluten-free pizza or gluten-free bread with peanut butter and jelly during the race, or Mountain House meals. And then I start having tummy problems. This race, I was like, you know what? I'm going into this fat adapted, and I'm going to stay low carb, no sugar during the race. I warned the team ahead of time, like if anything happens, I'll go back to carb. But basically, I'm going to try to give this thing a shot. And I made it through the whole race. I think the only time I cheated, I ate a potato or two at that beautiful venison dinner, because you just can't not eat the damn potatoes. But even when we got to the grocery store, I stayed with cheeses and meats and stayed low carb. And I got through the race and I had no tummy problems. And so I think I'm going to keep doing that moving forward. It was kind of it was a gamble, but I thought it paid off. I felt no energy drain. I felt no bonk. I ended up with way more food left over. I almost felt like I didn't need to eat, because if you're fat adapted, basically you know each pound of fat on your body is about 3,300 calories. So for a 4-day race, you need 4.5 pounds of fat. If your body can eat that fat fast enough, you really don't need to eat. I ate because I was hungry and I wanted to eat, but I didn't have that feeling of like when you have the carbs and then it wears off and you bonk and then you need more carbs, and if you stop eating, you start falling apart. I had none of that. So I don't know if anybody wants to try it, or but it's a Primal Blueprint or Primal Endurance are the books. They have a podcast as well. It's pretty interesting for expedition racing concept.
So I ain't doing it. I do low carb like in my regular life, and then it's like such a treat to have carbs during races. So, but I did want to say the thing that I really enjoyed that I'd never taken on a race before was chia seed pudding. So I had that idea and was talking to Jade Eagles, actually. He said, well, I'm going to use breast milk storage bags. And I thought, well, that's kind of a neat idea. So if you get breast milk storage bags, they have a little Ziploc at the top, and they have like a little tear off on the side that you can tear it off and just like eat right out of the bag, kind of like a baby food pouch. So yeah, I put some chia seeds in there and some cocoa powder and sugar, and then added water during the race and let it, sit for an hour or two, and then tore off the side and ate it. And chia seeds are really great for you. And I wished I had more of those. I think I only took 2 or something because it felt like a test, but it was a good test. And I think you all should try it too. And those breast milk storage bags, they were great for coffee too. I put some instant cappuccino in one of them and then added water. It's like a cold coffee, and you can drink right out of the bag because it tears off. And I wouldn't have really known they existed except for Jade told me. And, I breastfed years ago, and apparently they didn't have them then, but they do now. So there you go. That's my tip.
New technologies in breastfeeding that are helping out the AR scene. Those are new things. I haven't heard those. So thanks, guys. Anything to add?
Yeah, there's one other one that I'm surprised Andrea didn't bring up, but in Croatia, there was these pate little meat things. They're about this big around, and it was basically like almost like maybe a shot glass full of this pureed meat. And like Clay was saying earlier, sometimes the stuff you eat makes your tongue get all nasty, especially if it's salty or whatever, and you start getting blisters. These little pate things were amazing. It's like eating ice cream, but it was meat, which is usually a fatty meat, but they had tuna and chicken and liver, and we would just gobble up these things at the grocery store, and then we're eating these pate things as we went along. But the texture I thought was just amazing during the race. Way better. Like I ate a lot of dried stuff, like we had dried some meats and stuff like that, and it was so hard and salty and everything. It really was hurting my tongue, and so I felt myself gravitating towards the slog, the nice, the creamy. It's not rough. It doesn't hurt your tongue, and it gave me the fat and the proteins that I needed to keep going through the race.
Yeah, they sell those like squeeze, like toothpaste tubes of liver pate and yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Priceless.
Caitlin, you told us a bit about your sleep strategy earlier, but everybody always wants to know, how much sleep do you think you got in the course of the race?
Let's see. So we didn't sleep any the first night. I think second night we took 3 hours, just because we were cold and miserable and wet, and we were exhausted. And then we probably slept about 2 hours after that every night. So we probably got about between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. It wasn't a whole lot, but I think it was sufficient. Typically when you get further into the race, like day 4, you really start to feel it. Like the top teams can get away with not sleeping a whole lot because they're only out there 3 days. They don't sleep the first night. They might sleep 2 days the second night. And then an hour or two the third night, and they're powering through in like between 60 and 72 hours. When we're out on the course, 4 or 5 days, the fourth and fifth days, you're feeling it, and the last day, that Thursday, when we were on the long bike, we stopped once or twice, and we slept. We were definitely feeling it. And the one time that one of the times we stopped, I mean, we rolled into this checkpoint. There was a beautiful meadow, just green grass. It was like so picturesque. I mean, we just were like, this is where we're going to take a nap. And we kind of just sprawled out. Sun was out for the first time in 2 days, and we probably slept there 45 minutes, but it was great. It was the first time that we really, I thought, had a good sleep outside, when it wasn't cold or wet and we weren't on something hard. So that was nice. But overall, we probably, slept between 8 and 10 hours, which, again, wasn't to me, not a lot, but sufficient to get through the race. And as far as sleep strategy, we slept with the TAs. We couldn't, until it stopped raining the last day, we really couldn't sleep out in on the trails. We typically would do that. So for most part, the sleep was in the TAs, and we were thankful that most of the TAs were in where we could sleep inside. And I think that was huge, considering the weather was not great.
Well, that picture was online.
Yeah.
And Jason and I were like, that's Team thisABILITY, because we recognized Clay's bike.
Yeah, that was totally
There's
us.
all this fun commentary about, I'm sure you saw, like, it looking like some kind of odd murder scene or something. I was like, no, it looks like paradise. They look like they are probably very happy.
It was the first time I think I felt warm, because we got there, the sun was out, we put on our big yellow, SOL bags, and then the sun hit that, and it was, I was just kind of like, oh my goodness, it was really heavenly when the sun came out behind a cloud, hit that bag, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is almost as good as a hot towel.
Yeah. Can you all share? Oh, go ahead, Chip.
Yeah, let me stay on the thing again, going from the educational standpoint. The other thing, since we are a little bit experienced, we were all prepared when we got into the TAs. We've got a sleeping mat that we can lay on, so you're not on the ground. We had sleeping bags or bivy sacks. We all have earplugs and eye masks, because it's noisy. You have all these people coming and going, teams in and out, and banging around and blowing up their mattresses and taking down their mattresses. So having the earplugs and the eye masks made it possible to sleep at the TA, even though it's usually not ideal. But we couldn't sleep out in the field. But the other thing is 2 things that happened that made us sleep a little bit longer. I think the first thing that happened, all of us slept but Clay. For whatever reason, there were one time he just laid there and just rested, but he didn't sleep for 2 hours. So we knew the team, like we're going to need to do another sleep soon to get him caught up. And then the other thing, I think it was day 2.5 to 3. I mean, I ended up getting just obliterated chafing, and it was open wounds, and I'm worried about getting infected, and it was just terrible. And one time, like, Caitlin was like, hey, we got to go. And I was like, I don't need sleep. I've got to lay here and let this air out and scab over, or I'm going to be pulled from the race because I'm bleeding out down here. This is bad. And it had never happened to me before. It was the gear choices I chose and the amount of wetness that we had. And I hadn't lubed up enough with D&E cream or A&D cream or whatever Clay gave me. And I got through it. Like, again, I'm like, Caitlin, what do I do? Andrea, what do I do? Clay, what do you got? What kind of, I was like, I had never dealt with this before. So I think we slept an extra hour and a half one time just to let my skin repair itself. so that I could go back out into the wetness and try not to get infected. So that took us a little bit longer.
Do you have tips for your comfort kit? Like powder, like creams, any kinds of things that you recommend people?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do differently in the future. And the funny thing is, JD Eskilsson, I always hear about him walking around naked from the waist down because of chafing. And it's like, ha ha ha, we listen to him on the podcast, JD's naked, and the TA boss says you got to put your pants on before you come into TA, and it's giggle giggle. And here I am, I'm that guy. I'm like, guys, I've got to take my pants off. And so, I'm walking around in my rain pants with just my underwear on underneath, but I'm holding it out like I can't let anything touch anything. But I was like, I think JD's onto something. Like naked sounds real good right now. So
like maybe
let's go
really
back.
baggy shorts or a skirt even.
Yeah, is anything that I couldn't have anything touching my skin. That was the main thing. So I normally am wearing like tights, like a lot of people wear tights, right? It's it's quick wicking. You don't get any chafing between your legs. I didn't want anything touching anything. It hurt, especially walking uphill. I think where I made the error, whenever there's wetness against your skin, I think the A&D cream, like Clay had it with him. And then I also talked to Brent Russell, one of our other teammates that does 100 milers. And he was like, oh, absolutely. You got to go to the A&D. It's preventative maintenance. It stops your skin from absorbing the water. Also, I think I probably should have considered looser fitting clothing. So, for example, instead of wearing tights, I probably could have had like maybe bike. I think Clay was wearing like a pair of wool bike pants, but they weren't like super tight. So there's a little bit of airflow going through there. I think what I had tights where wet clothing was right against my skin. And then I also doubled up the clothing because it was so wet. There's no use in putting on dry clothes because you're just going to go right back out in the rain. So I just put on an extra set of tights on the bottom and an extra wool shirt on the top. Immediately, it all got wet. So now I got 2 layers of wet clothing, and again, we're biking for 12 hours or whatever, and just stuff's moving around. But I'd never had that happen before. But I think so change of clothing and then or a different type of clothing and putting on the cream that Clay had probably would have saved me. But
that's one of the things I always struggle with in transition areas is preventative time, because you're trying to improve transition area time, TA time. But also these things can ultimately save you not only time, but just make your race much more enjoyable. And so how much time do you take to put on that anti-chafing cream, to lube up your feet or powder your feet, to whatever it is, versus like trying to just move through that TA? Because it's so tempting to think, oh, I can handle it. And maybe for a short race, you can. But obviously these things can really escalate over the course of hours or days in an expedition. So did you come into your TAs differently this time? I remember you saying that was one thing from the last race you wanted to focus on. Did you, how did the TAs go for you?
I think we all went into it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
we were probably, we were probably slower than we anticipated, but one, we slept at every TA. So that was, 2 to 3 hours right there. But 2, we came to the TA a lot more tired, I think, than we did in Ozarks, just because due to the weather, we kept moving. So we hadn't had any breaks, and then there was no paddle section. So, physically we were tired, we were wet, we were, chafing as Chip said, we were cold. So it was like coming to a TA. And we had to eat. We're not eating much in the rain and on the trail. So it was almost like we had a lot more to do on the TA or at the TAs because we couldn't do it while we were on the trail, So the quick TA transitions, I think, kind of went out the window just because of the race conditions that we were experiencing. We did need a little bit extra time at the TAs just because of the weather. And, I think I want to say most teams did that. Of course, the top teams are going to blitz through. But I would say most teams probably spent more time with the TAs just because you weren't stopping on the trail. You couldn't eat as much or stop and rest as much on the trail as maybe we were used to in other expeditions.
Yeah.
So we had 2 excellent transitions. 2 excellent. The very first one.
Oh, the first one.
We transitioned from trek to bike. We did that fast.
Less than 30 minutes. Yeah.
It was less than 30 minutes on that one. So
yeah, that was
awesome.
That was our best transition.
Yeah, we were fresh. It was nice weather. it was good. Even though we ran that whole first trek, which I was really proud of us for that too. That was kind of a long haul for us to be running, but we were with the teams and it was fun and it was sunny and it just felt, oh, we're on the trail running. That feeling of technical running, especially downhill, is just kind of a cool feeling. Anyway, so that transition was awesome. The other transition that was awesome that I think we all surprised ourselves was that very last one before the last paddle, when we had trekked really, really hard up the hill, to find out that the TA is actually at the top of the hill, not, down in the valley. So we got up there and we were really afraid that we were going to miss the cutoff for the race. I mean, so I think how long?
Yeah.
Was it? Like only 12 minutes, maybe.
Oh
8
God,
minutes.
it was less than 15 minutes. You're right. The first and last TAs were absolute best transitions.
Yeah. I couldn't believe how fast we put our bikes together. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
That's impressive at the end of the race.
It was out of necessity. Like,
we thought we weren't
have
going
to
to
do
make it.
something. You do it,
Yeah. So that sounds like one of the proudest moments, those two TAs. Do you have other proudest moments, highlights, lowlights, just kind of overall things that you particularly enjoyed about the race or didn't?
So I just have to go first because I just think this is still so dang funny. So I was navigating for us and we had found the point and I set off onto a trail that I think is the right way to go. And Chip kind of corrects me and says, no, it's back there. And I'm like, okay, well, he's usually right. So we'll go the way he wants to go. And as we're walking on the way that he wants to go, he's talking about his usual method of training, which is when he's, when we're navigating out there and he finds out that I've done something, not right, he'll let me go the wrong way for, a couple 100 meters before I realize either he's not behind me or I realize myself that I made the mistake. So that's usually how I'm learning from Chip in our day-to-day life. And so he's kind of telling Clay and Caitlin this funny. A lot of times I just let her go off and he thinks it's super funny. And then I said, well, sometimes you're wrong too. And right after I say that, we realized that I was right. And we had to turn around and go take the trail that I said we should go. And I have to say, at the expense of Chip, I was so proud of myself.
Yes.
Right.
It was almost as good as the one where we're on the bikes and you two are kind of saying like, it's this way. No, it's this way. And you were right. It was this way. And, off towards that field, and Chip's like, okay, let's go. And he kept riding the other way and we're all going that way. It was clearly a great sleep deprivation kind of moment.
Yeah.
I do think that's when I realized just how much we needed sleep because Chip clearly agreed with me that we should go the way I wanted to go. And yet he went off the other way. Like, oh no, sleep. We need sleep.
We need sleep.
It's an emergency almost.
Any other highlights or lowlights?
I think that there's another one. There's twice we had to whip out the zip ties to get the bikes fixed, and we did that very, very quickly. It was like my map board like totally just like fell apart, and we were able to pull over really quick and do some stuff and zip tie some stuff. And then there's another time I think Clay's front brake, like one of the little screws came undone, and he's like, "What is this? I hear this rattle," and like we pulled over, and I think we kind of worked together on that, put some zip ties on there, and we were back up and running in 2 minutes. And so I think it's that that ability to noodle through problems and solve them very quickly and have the correct gear. And we got through the whole race with only those two like little bike mechanicals. It's pretty proud of us for that. I mean, yeah.
I think one of my favorite moments was the early mornings riding through some of these little tiny towns. It almost felt like abandoned or even apocalyptic. Some of them, these little tiny towns would be half a dozen farmhouses, just super beautiful and quiet, May wildflowers everywhere, kind of misty. We're biking through them, and then apropos of that, we just biked up this hill. We're really low on water, and we're thinking like we got to find like a hose or something on side of somebody's house. And we get to the crest of this hill. There's this, quintessential elderly Croatian couple just kind of chilling on the porch with their dogs. And, we engage them. They don't speak a lick of English or German or any other language. And, we're kind of motioning and doing the whole hand signaling, and they figure out that we want some water, and they take us around the back to their well. And, we're just kind of, pretending to talk and, kind of having a really nice kind of cultural interaction with these, very bedraggled looking adventure racers, looking for water. And we're, kind of filling it up in their pump, and then, off we go. But, Caitlin, maybe you want to tell them about your pins that you bring on international races.
Oh, so I did this for our race in Lesotho and decided to do this again for Croatia. So I get these little friendship pins, and what they are, these little label pins that have an American flag, and then in this case, it had a Croatian flag. And so the idea is that as we go through these towns, or as we go through the race, and there's somebody that helps us, gives us water, provides us directions, just in general, provides us help during the race, we would provide, give them a pin in thanks. And so a few times we did have the opportunity to do this. We'd stop, and we would be at kind of an intersection, and we asked a passerby, or which way is the town, and she would tell us this way. And then another time we asked for a grocery store, and we got directions for a grocery store, or water, if we were running low on water, and we stop at somebody's house. And so it's kind of just a fun way to interact with the locals. And they're always very appreciative when we provide them the pin. So yeah, it's kind of just a tradition I hope to keep up as we go to more international races.
Wow, that's so cool. So before we move to the wrap-up questions, I have to ask, what are your opinions on bike shorts? The great AR controversy over bike shorts and bike shoes. Oh, and rain skirts. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on controversial gear, such as bike shorts versus tri shorts. I know you all have been I know Clay's been experimenting, so let's hear it.
Well, I ditched the bike shorts and I wore triathlon shorts the whole time, and I and just did great. Didn't have any issues at all. No tailbone soreness, no chafing. I like the kind of the peanut shaped pad that they have on a triathlon short, because it's not like wearing a pair of shorts where you've got a seam down the middle. And I didn't miss the pad at all. And Chip and Andrea and Caitlin all put me onto the idea of the power straps instead of bike shoes. And I was glad I wasn't switching between bike shoes and hiking shoes. It just felt like one more logistical thing to keep track of. And I've been on races where, I'm in my bike shoes, and then there's a small trek section, and I'm like, oh crap, I don't have a decent pair of trekking shoes, and it's uncomfortable. So not having bike shoes on this, I felt worked perfectly fine. And I don't think it slowed me down at all.
So you don't feel like losing the ability to pull on the hills is
I think the straps, the straps help enough with that. It's not as strong as having a good pair of, clipped in shoes, but honestly, it was so wet and muddy. I was glad not to be clipped in. I think that was also part of it. A lot of the riding was mudsliding. There was plenty of, there was a lot of time when I didn't have my feet in anything, because I just wanted to have such quick release to be able to put my foot down at a given moment, especially on a lot of the muddy trails.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I know that we're going way over time. And so I'm sure, like me, everybody has lots more questions for you, but perhaps we should start wrapping it up. So I'm just you know, it wasn't that much more than a year ago today. We first reached out to Team thisABILITY and said, hey, how's this for a crazy idea? And it took you that long to say yes. How are you all feeling now that the big goal is accomplished, physically and mentally, especially because I know some racers report after these big goals having a bit of a like a dip, bit of a letdown. So how are you feeling, and how are you managing those feelings?
I guess I'll see if Andrew's on mute, but first of all, I just got to say it's been super fun getting to know Clay and you. If you hadn't have called us, you know, we would have just been a familiar face on the trail, but we wouldn't have gotten to know each other. So I just really appreciate just having the opportunity to get to know you guys so well. I feel like you're family at this point, and I would race anywhere in the world with you. The race itself, I think Croatia, it's I want to go do the race again because I want it to be cold. I want it to be warm and sunny in the way I expected. But that being said, this was one of the hardest races I think we've ever done. The mental toughness that it took to get through 50 hours of rain and cold. I'm super proud of the team on how we performed. There wasn't any complaining or anything. It was like, this is what it is. This is why we train hard. Yes, it sucked. Yes, we're suffering, but we're going to get through this. And every team, not just our team, every team that went into a TA and then turned around, went right back out into the mess and crossed that finish line are just amazing human beings that they persevered through it. So I think it was a huge accomplishment that we did as well as we did. Again, we had a bunch of amazing life-changing experiences, you know, like our dinner with the venison and all that. So all in all, I think it was a huge success. I'm so glad you reached out, and I'm glad that Andrea and Caitlin like to do this type of stuff. And I'm glad, you know, Clay hung in there with us, and he fit in perfectly with the team. And again, it's like it couldn't have gone better, you know.
So I think it's always a shift going from being with these same four people for that many hours, you know, 24/7. Like, you just don't spend that much time, even with the closest people in your lives, that concentrated amount of time. So there's always like an adjustment to like, okay, the race is over. And then slowly, you know, we still have all our meals together. And then slowly we're like, oh, this one's gone. And then that one's gone. And then here we are back to our lives that are our regular lives. I don't know. And I'm always thankful that Chip is part of my regular life. So I don't feel abandoned when I get home. But it is a little bit of a shift to like, oh, it's over and done. No matter how well you did or didn't do, like, there's still a lot of processing to think about what happened. And for me, this race, looking back at it, I've liked it more and more. Like, during the race, it was just kind of so grueling and so like a little bit disappointing that it wasn't the fun, sunny, beautiful race I wanted it to be. But now in hindsight, as I recall it over and over and over again, I'm liking it more and more. And I'm already forgetting what the cold really felt like. Like, I know I can tell you without a doubt that it was the coldest I've been for the longest amount of time, but I can't really remember how bad it was. I can tell you, I know it was bad, but so, I mean, in some ways it's an upper and a downer when you get home. It's like, it's just hard to let it go. But thankfully, I feel like looking forward to the next thing is always what gets me out of the slump. And so knowing I've got another race coming up real soon has really helped me at least be a little more motivated to recover well. You know, I was a little bit sore. I didn't have any injuries, but like for about a week, you know, I kind of needed to ease into working out again. And I don't feel like I'm 100% recovered right now. Usually with running, like doing things on my feet takes a little longer. But I'm getting close. So anyway, that's how I feel about all that.
Yeah, I'm super proud of this team. You know, I think we pushed harder in this race overall than we really ever have. I mean, you know, the the first trekking section, we ran the whole way. It was 3 hours. I don't think we've ever done that before. And then we transitioned very quickly. And then, when it started to rain, Monday night, we went to 2 days of straight rain. I mean, we pushed the whole time. So I think it was a testament really to us, to our ability that we can push and go fast when we want to, but also kind of relax and have a good time when we need to as well. So I'm pretty proud of ourselves. I mean, I was really proud that we stayed full course until really the very last day. I mean, that was the goal. And I think we did really well. And so I was proud of how well we did in the full course. I was proud of how well we interacted as a team. Our navigation, I thought, was really good. I was really proud of how we did the dual nav and saved ourselves several times by having 2 people on the maps. So lots to be proud of. On this race. It was hard, but there was also times when it was beautiful, like trekking through Slovenia was just an incredible experience. On the ridge tops there, kind of in the evening time frame, and that's something that I'll never forget. So yeah, it was great.
What's coming up next for all of you? I know that Andrea, you've got Endless Mountains, and Chip, do you as well?
It's kind of a fun story. I asked my team, Caitlin and Lewis and Amanda and Andrea, and hey, you want to do Endless Mountains? And everybody's like, no, we got too many other races on the calendar. We can't do it. And so I ended up pairing up with Adventure Addicts, Michelle Fouché and Paul Morris and Brenda Carlson. And then all of a sudden, Team thisABILITY decides to put together a team. And so, yes, Andrea and I are going to be heavy competition for Endless Mountains coming up.
Yeah, that was kind of a strange turn of events there. But I'll be racing with Lewis and Amanda and Jason, who have also all raced as Team thisABILITY. We've gotten to have a lot of different teammates over the years. So bringing everybody together, it's kind of challenging. We haven't really figured out how to do that. And so they still needed a teammate, and I had a change of heart thinking, because at first 6 expedition races in 1 year, I just didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could pull it off. So I didn't want to commit to a team. And sure enough, I started having FOMO a little bit too much, thinking, well, if Chip can do it, well, I've got to see if I can do it. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a neat race, and it'll be really fun to try to beat Chip.
Yeah. And
I don't know how likely.
Yeah, we did. This is an ambitious year with 6 races. We did Florida, we did the Ozarks, we did Croatia. So that's 3 so far. We're halfway through the year, and then we're going to do Endless, and then turn around and do Colorado, and then turn around and go to Africa for the World Championships. Caitlin's on that team. Andrea and I are doing Colorado as a couple, just to see, how can we do as a couple, and so we're going to do that race there. And so 6 expeditions. We're going. We Andrea and I were the 2 top in number of hours racers in the country on hours on the course. But this year I set a personal goal for 800 hours of racing within the year. So I think it's like 2.37 hours per day every single day of the year of being on a race course.
Oh wow! Didn't you and Andrea and Chip, didn't you guys win in your division in one of the races, in the race where we first met? Forget what race that was, but it was a few years ago now. And I think you guys won your division.
Was it the 36? Was it the Rootstock 36 hour?
Maybe. I don't remember which one it was. Oh, what? Yeah. Was it 2 Rivers?
I think it was 2 Rivers. Yeah, we took top spot in the 2-person co-ed.
Yeah. So
that's one reason we were going into Florida with that, and we're also probably going to do C2C this year as 2-person co-ed, and just try to put ourselves in those rankings, in addition to the normal rankings. But it's also it's logistically easier if it's us, because it's like we just we're like a well-oiled machine, and just walk in and do the race.
Well, after we do Colorado with just each other, we might be looking for teammates for C2C. The verdict is out. I don't know. We haven't done an expedition race with just the two of us since our very first one, which was in Belize. So I don't know. It's just changing it up and, see how it goes.
Shake things up. And Caitlin, aren't you going to be in Colorado too this summer?
No, well, so I am running the Leadville 100. That's I think 2 weeks after the Colorado expedition race. So that's my big summer goal, is to do the Leadville 100 and then turn around and do Worlds after that.
All right. And Clay, are you going to be there to greet us when we get back with anything fun?
I'm having a little bit of FOMO on all the races. No, for me, the rest of the summer is an 8, a couple 24 hours, and hopefully we get off the wait list for nationals. So, but we starting to, let's keep our eyes open for what expeditions pop up for next year.
Yeah. And so if Croatia, if you either Andrea's team or Chip team, if you guys win that raffle again, do you think you'll try? You think you'll go back to Croatia? Would you recommend it?
Hell yes. Hell yes. It was a great race. The race director was great. The volunteers were great. The logistics of the race, the pre-race stuff, the post-race stuff, they did a phenomenal job. And even with all the weather changes, they accommodated that and they figured it out. I have no complaints about this race. I'd come back year after year. It's amazing.
I was going to say, we want to go do the race whether we win the raffle or not.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll happen, but yeah, we haven't talked about 2024 much.
But Igor is going to have a 24 edition from what I understand, right?
Probably, yeah.
So people, yeah. Okay. Well, everybody, is there anything else that there's lots we didn't cover. I have a million questions we don't sound like we're going to have time for, but anything that you want to add before we sign off?
I just encourage teams to, if you're pretty comfortable with the 24-hour, the 48-hour in your backyard, consider an international race. It's a different sport. It's not the same, but it's more of a life-changing experience. The friendships you get, and the again, once you're 3 or 4 days into a race, I think the colors are more vibrant, the sounds are better, your memories are more seared in your head. The food tastes better when you sit down at a table. The wine is even amazing when you're 3 days in and you drink a liter of wine. So yeah, I just encourage people to take the jump and pair up with a team that kind of knows what they're doing and done these races and get out there and do these big races. Seriously, I say to a lot of people, this is where I feel most alive, is on a race course in a big race.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end it on. You all, I'm just so impressed by you, so proud of you. It's just like anything, the more questions you ask, the more questions you have. There's just so much within those 4 or 5 days. It's a very dense time. There's so much more to talk about and think about, but thank you for this time that you shared with all of us. I just so value these race rambles, and since I couldn't be there on the last day for the end party to pick your brains, this has been really special for me. So thanks, everybody. We're really proud of you, and we'll be rooting for you at the Leadville 100 and at the Endless Mountains. I don't know, who am I going to root for? Oh God, send me chocolates and that's what I'll do.
Hey, thanks so much for hosting and facilitating the conversation. It's always fun to have an outsider come in and ask questions, and so thank you for your time on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Okay, appreciate it.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a comment.
If you have a question for the next mailbag segment, call 757-354-4795 and leave us a voicemail or a text with your name, city you are calling from, and your question.
To find additional content, including the video versions of these discussions, you can search for thisABILITY Racing on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
We hope this podcast inspired you to focus on your abilities and plan your next adventure.
See you on the trail.